Yesterday morning, I got myself tangled in the leg machine with with my headset, with my headphones. So I am constantly tangled. Like a while back, I think it was last year about this time, I got my necklace tangled in my hairdryer.
What?
It is very dangerous because,
oh my gosh.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen. Well, I'm actually a threat to myself. So I am doing the, what's that leg thing called, Steph? The
extension.
Yeah, but the one that works like these ham things, quad things. Anyway, it hurts. So my headset,
Very technical.
I have that old little tiny shuffle.
Oh,
and
yes,
I only
please.
want to use it because it's so lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
But the headphones have the longest cord ever because I had to special order those things from Amazon because they're extinct. And I can't run the volume and I can only advance. So I'm on there and I'm trying to, do my thing and I go to get out of the apparatus and first it goes, yanks right up. And when they're in, they're pretty solid. That is, I kind of yelped a little bit and I had about 4 people turn, because 6 in the morning gym time is a very popular time. And if you happen to be at the Gretna Anytime Fitness, it's a very popular time to observe what I may do. What shall we talk about today?
I don't know.
Oh, we had such a good session at Grief's Journey, which is formerly known as Teddy Bear Hollow, one of our Mentor Academy sessions. It was designed to be around understanding grief and loss, and the focus was around grief as we experience when we lose someone, whether that's death, but also whether that's transitions, divorce, incarceration, deportation. And there was a great conversation about how we grieve. And some people grieve through intuitive means, and some people grieve through instrumental means. And Tess and I are often, I think the joy in us sitting directly across from one another in our little pod back there is that we actually get to witness seeing things through the other person's eyes. So not only are we generationally different, we are different with our strengths, but we're also different with the way that we respond. And we got into this great conversation about intuitive versus instrumental. So when it comes to grief, intuitive individuals use a lot of phrases like, I feel, or they express feeling, they cope with grief or challenge. Not even grief, but just challenges. If you are more of an intuitive person, and I think for me that strength is empathy, and you will also say connectedness, but the intuitive piece to me is so strong, and it's that we express and we deal and we cope and we understand, we process through emotion. I had a wonderful presentation with the retired military officers Wednesday evening. And there was a gentleman who was sitting across from me who was telling me about his intuition. And it actually came up because his sister had been sick, his twin sister had been sick, and he knew it. He sensed it. And she lives in California. And he said, I've always had this, he goes, it's happened about 6 times in my life, this very gut response that something's wrong. And he said, I knew something was wrong with my sister, and I reached out. He told his wife, I gotta go. He said, I just grabbed a bag, got on a plane, and he went out and he found her. She lives alone. She was in diabetic shock. Had he not gone,
Oh my God.
they feel very strongly that she may not have survived. He told me about 3 or 4 more incidents. One when he was flying a plane in Vietnam, and they told him to, what's that called?
Ascend.
And he said, no, they told him to descend.
Okay.
And he said, no. He said, I just felt, no, I can't. No, I can't. And he ended up ascending, and his engine went out. And had he not been in a position where he could glide in, he would have ended up in the jungle. So I had said to him, we were just talking about intuition and intuitive sense, and I think there are people that have a gift when it comes to that, and I feel strongly that I've probably denied my intuition for many, many years, but understanding that it's how I process information has helped me too. Now, Tess is a little more instrumental, so when it comes to transition and change, it's more around action. So I would love for you to share about your move into your apartment and how you instrumentally were dealing with that transition and that change.
Interesting. So an instrumental way of thinking as compared to intuitive would be to respond instead of I feel this way in a tough situation or change, would be to respond and say I think. And so I've been really cognizant of that when people ask me how I feel. I often respond I think. Or I pause and I explain it at an intellectual level before I then get into maybe how I'm emotionally responding to it. With change or with a difficult situation, people that have high instrumental change respond in a cognitive and physical way. So they'll process it through their brain, through logic, and they'll also want to have physical coping as compared to like someone with intuitive who copes with physical touch or comfort. Someone that's instrumental will want to be doing something. So be up and walking around or pacing or be doing something. You can't really identify the emotions of someone with instrumental that processes instrumentally outright as much as you could. So your face is an open book. I can pretty much tell how you're feeling. And when you look at me, really? Nah. When you look at me, you can probably tell if I'm like thinking through something or if I'm like fully present or if I'm trying to process something at the same time, but you might not be able to tell how I'm emotionally responding.
When you think about that related to your strengths,
oh, so much. So much so. Definitely, I mean, I have a lot of high strategic thinking themes in my dominant themes, and definitely it's my strategic, my learner, high intellection, high input that is just wanting to process through things.
one of the things that I loved that you said about your new space, so moving into your first alone space, I said, how are you feeling with that? What are, is it going well? And I believe what you said is you're finding all these little thinking nooks.
Yep.
And so when I was thinking about your intellection, and I can't wait to see your space, by the way, because I'm just going to go with some duct tape and identify what I think are her thinking nooks. There's one over here, and there's one over here. But I think that's instrumental, too. Now,
Definitely.
it may look like intuitive,
Sure.
because it looks like reflection and think time, and it is. It can be both. And I think all of us transition in both instrumental and intuitive ways.
Definitely.
And if it's really, really, really hard, I float towards instrumental because I can't get a hold of the emotion, so therefore I do.
Sure.
And I think through doing, you go to the emotion.
Definitely. So in this whole process of transitioning out of like my old apartment, I was living with someone in pretty close quarters, and then to living by myself, one of the things I found were just the space and the margin to think, like even just having the physical space to do so, and has allowed a greater sense of awareness. And a big thing with that, I was telling Allie a little while ago, there's been like some like larger like changes happening in my life. And I, with the busyness, I haven't necessarily had time to kind of pause and really reflect on it. But I found myself one night a couple days ago, it's probably like Sunday or Monday night, and I was trying to think through a lot of these things, and I was thinking through all these things that I wanted to do. So I wanted to finish unpacking my kitchen, and I wanted to like clean and vacuum, and as I'm processing what I want to do, and also like all of these other like life things that are happening, I found myself like 2 hours later, I'd just been pacing around my apartment and just like walking. And that is such an instrumental thing to do, is you need to be physically doing something, but some sort of physical act, some sort of walking or fidgeting, or for me it's very much pacing, it allows my brain to then concentrate on the thoughts rather than what I am doing with my like physical entity, because there's some motion, so then it gets my brain in a place where I can just focus on something. So pacing's a big thing. If you ever talk to me on the phone, I'm most likely pacing.
Pacing the margins?
Pacing the margins. Depends on where we are, if I'm in the office or if I have a hard time talking on the phone and driving, not because but because I can't get up and walk around, while I'm talking on the phone, so.
I'm going to look for that. I'll do some strength spotting that. You used the word margins again this week. I think that's a great word that you're reflecting on.
Definitely.
For those who know me, and I've been sending this out to some of my close friends because I think they'll just find a lot of this hilarious. When I get really upset, it is like I'm mad, I go right to the scrub brush. I am cleaning. As if I'm very upset or there's something I can't control. And that was a coping mechanism I learned very early on in my life. Big family, lots of dynamics. We had a lot of chaos. And the one thing that I could do was control cleanliness. So I would just get mad and I'd go scrub the sink. And so for those of you who know me well, if you come to my house and things are shiny, I've been crabby. But also it was an instrumental way of dealing with the intuitive sense of chaos.
Sure.
And so I think it would be good for people to spend some time thinking about how do we deal with transition? How do we deal with challenge? How do we deal with change? Instrumentally, intuitively, both. And then how does it really magnify your strengths? Sure. How does the intuitive piece, I know, and I'm surprised Tess hasn't brought it up yet, connectedness is very high for me. So I believe that piece of connectedness leads to a sense of intuition.
Definitely.
I have a gut response to certain things. And I think Tess's individualization and learner together. So when I'm thinking about her pacing, I'm thinking because her brain is thinking about specific instances, specific people, how to handle it a little bit differently, how to look at it a little bit differently. Yeah. It's all of your strengths in action. And that's really using them as a tool.
Sure.
And we talked a little bit about that last time. Those moments in the basement, these are still your tools. They also need rest. And they need a break. And they need time to process. I think self-awareness is just tremendously underrated. And when you know yourself and you know that I need some pacing and spacing in the margins, to give yourself that. And to grant yourself some self-care. As a culture, we are really, I think, bad at self-care. Strengths has been another tool to help me take care of myself first so that I can look for the best in other people as well.
That's great. How would you then talk about how being an intuitive processor magnifies your strengths? You talked a little bit about your empathy. Talked a little bit about your connectedness.
My input says, I want to know how you feel. Please tell me how you feel. Please tell me what's coming next. Please tell me how to anticipate the next emotion.
Sure.
I think the input question marks mean love is very hard for other people to understand. If I had a superpower, it would be to jump into someone else's brain. I would like to know how you're thinking. I would like to know what you're feeling. I would like to, if I could hook people up here to sense that particular instance brought out this emotion. And I would especially love to know what brings you joy. I am fascinated by what makes people joyful. And I think with self-care too, I'm trying to find what is it that I'm really joyful about. Great book called The 52 Lists that I purchased for myself and for Kim and Aaron. We try to really build each other up when it comes to self-care. And it's a list of every week. Every week you have a different list. And one of them is what brings you joy. Now, when was the last time you sat down and wrote out what brought you joy? And when I started to write it out, I was like, there aren't very many things on it. So I need to find more joyful
Sure.
moments. So if you were to write down what brings you joy, what would come to mind?
That's a good question. I think for me, places where there's space and places where there's margin. Not to use that word repetitively.
I'm a fan of that word.
Yeah, just places where and it looks different. I mean, it might be sitting down for a cup of coffee with a friend. Like I went and on Wednesday night of this week, I caught up with a friend, and she had just recently gotten married, and we hadn't spent a lot of time together in the past 6 months, but we used to be fairly close, being in one of the same small groups at church, and I got to catch up with her, and that was so joyful to be able to sit with her and to hear about everything that's going on in her life and what life is like being recently married, with all of that, and so that is something that brings me joy, is just being able to share life with someone in whatever way that looks like. Another thing that brings me joy is being out in nature and open spaces, especially on my own. I love to go hiking by myself and outside of the city, or just even driving by myself on long stretches of road where I'm not going to interact with awful drivers or anything like that. Just places where there's space and there's openness, and it almost is I can let my brain just go wherever it wants to go. I don't have to confine it, or I don't have to pull it back in and say, okay, well, Tess, you can't do this for very long because you have to be at a meeting in an hour, or you have to do this and you have to check this off your list. And I just get to be and to let my brain go where it would go without having to wrangle it in.
When was the last time you got to be? And where was it? And I'm going to encourage all of you who are watching to answer that question. And if you are watching this, email me and let me know, where was your last space that you just got to be and you weren't doing now I got to hurry and be to this, or I got to go do this. When was the last time you got to be? And where was it?
For me, it was this last Sunday, which I really appreciated. I went kayaking, and I didn't bring my watch, I didn't bring my phone, I didn't bring anything, and I didn't have any plans for the rest of the day, and it was just very open, and I wasn't worried about the time at all, and I'm kind of a time person. There's time, living on a timetable. I think most people are in this space, and I wasn't concerned about time, and I was just able to be there and really soak up the beautiful weather and the landscape, and being able to be out on the water was just a really great space to just be.
And remarkably, we were out there on the water about the same time. And I think about that too. Kayak is a way for me to be, because you're away from shore, at least for a while. What I tend to do, and this is my achiever that goes like this, I feel like I have to make it a workout. And on Sunday, I actually went across the side of the lake and parked the kayak and sat and watched the sunset. I mean, intentionally. I was like, I'm not getting an arm workout here. I'm just going to be.
That's good.
And captured a beautiful picture of that moment. And I think for a lot of us, we are so busy that when we don't take time to be, we're not spending time here. We're not spending time here. We're not doing those moments of self-care. And that can lead to more basement of your strengths if you don't take some time to just be and to find the space in the margins. I think that's a great analogy.
And I think it looks, different for everyone when you are just being, and when you're resting your strengths. Because for me, when I'm in those moments of, for some people, resting their strengths could be getting into a good book, or or listening, to a podcast or something like that. But that's definitely me owning my strengths and utilizing them all the time. And so for me to rest my strengths is to rid myself of all of that. And
It's a recharge.
Yeah. This week for one of my classes, we have to do like a devotional classic. So it's like a classic theologian or philosopher that there's an excerpt from, and from one of their texts, and then there's reflection questions and action items and things like that. And I read an excerpt from Henry Nouwen, and it was about solitude, and it was about talking about your time with God. And mine is very much like, okay, in Scripture or reading this other awesome book, and it's very much taking in resources and taking inwards. And his whole philosophy was, yes, you can do that, and those are great resources, but where are you pushing out everything to create space for God to then speak to you more clearly? Because when you have nothing that you're intaking, when you're in true solitude, you're not talking to anyone, you're not thinking about anything, the inner chaos comes out. And that's the phrase that he used. And when you allow that inner chaos to come out and you allow yourself to really sit in that, like when you think about just being silent for like 5 minutes, that isn't a thing that people normally do in life. But when you do it and you sit there, it allows that, what he says, inner chaos to come out. And when you start to deal with it slowly but surely, you'll be able to really rest in solitude and then, hear more clearly from God or connect, whatever you believe spiritually or religiously. But really being able to exude everything and to purge everything instead of constantly intaking it. It was really challenging for me because I'm like, okay, I just have this time. Okay, well, let me get into the Word and let me get all my annotation pens out and my Bible highlighters and my journal, and it becomes more of then a duty rather than doing rather than being. Sorry, you're fine.
So remarkably, my personal blog post the last 2 times has been about meditation. And I do 10 minutes in the morning, and I try to do a sleep meditation at night. But the 10 minutes in the morning, and I got into a heavy description of how I do that because I just got started with it. When you start, you look at energy coming, the energy in. So I do 5 minutes thinking left side. Left side indicates energy in.
Okay.
Right side indicates energy out. So when you sit and think about what you bring in, but then also what you're exuding, and that inner chaos, if you sit in 10 minutes of meditation, your brain's going to go all over the place, and you have to keep directing it back and directing it back, and to be still in the pause. And 10 minutes is a long time. And sometimes I'm like this, looking over how much more that I because I'm thinking about what I have to do next. And I think inner chaos, we don't ever plan these, but it is a really great demonstration of self-care. If you're sitting and spending a lot of time in that spin, and you don't spend 5 minutes of pause or time in the margins or whatever your self-care tactic that works is, that rest never really comes. And I think we are encouraged as a culture that busyness equals achievement. And what am I accomplishing in this busy, busy day? And if we can just sit and be, there's a whole lot more that actually gets done within that we end up projecting out to others. So that's a really good way for us to wrap up our thoughts on instrumental versus intuitive, and both. Because when you think about what we just described, that's both.
Definitely.
But also I think the ways that we are different, often when we have these conversations, we find out actually how much we have in common.
Yeah.
And that's what we hope these conversations lead other people to do. So again, I'm going to ask you to email us with, where are you when you are just in that moment of be, in that moment of pause? And where is your favorite place to find that? And then we'll share them. On our next time, we'll read what people have contributed, because it'll give me some ideas for joyful moments, and probably ideas to others as well.
Sounds great.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.